I've been meaning to get to this one for about a year and a half now. Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Pseudoregalia, available I believe only on Steam currently. We'll talk more about the game and how it works as we go, but worth noting this is a 100% run as my LPs tend to be, but specifically I'm following a route I found via user GoatPrince here on YouTube, because in my practice runs as well as research on the internet, frankly they have one of the most efficient routes I've seen. At least barring actual speedruns, which get ridiculous. Let's not mess around, let's get right on into the game on this save file. And they really just plop you in. As you can tell, this game is very visually influenced by late PS1 and N64 games. In fact, if you check the options here, there's the retro resolution scale option I pretty much don't use throughout the rest of the LP. What this does is it actively makes it so the textures get filtered in a way like certain older console games would on TVs. And I imagine playing this game on an old CRT at this point actively would look really good. I'm not playing with that option at large, though, just because I prefer the way the sharp pixels look. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to fall out of my cage. I hope the princess won't be upset with me. That's actually the first of several Goat Butler NPCs located throughout the game's level design, some of them in actively pretty well-hidden places. They sort of shed more light on the world and the lore, but it's one of those where the state of things here is definitely very ethereal, purposefully. So don't expect very concrete story information as you go. So moving out of the first room, we find ourselves at an impasse immediately, and we can only go this direction, and this is where the game's immediate nature is pretty obvious. It's a 3D platformer. The protagonist here, Sybil, actually has very smooth controls, but we want to come over here to grab our first power-up. That's what these glowing lights are. This is the Dream Breaker. Press the X button or left click. Attack freely while moving to vanquish foes. Hitting enemies will build up magical power. To use it, hold B and the F key to heal. This is Sybil's main attack method. With that said, while you do use it to take out some enemies along the way, as well as a couple of boss fights, but it's actively more a tool for platforming utility than anything. You can also actively throw it with one of the shoulder buttons, which doesn't serve much purpose at the moment, but there is a secondary effect that can have later on. With that said, if you actively get hit strong enough by certain enemies, you'll also drop the Dream Breaker outright and need to grab it. Which can really suck in pretty tight circumstances because, as that pop-up also mentioned, this is your main way of healing. That bar on the far left that's white at the very top of it will fill up as you attack enemies, and you need to hold down, for me it's the circle button technically, not the B button, to heal. And if the Dream Breaker isn't in your hands, you can't heal. But that said, healing itself is also pretty limited, as while you can use multiple pips of it in a row, you need to stand still to use it at the moment. That gem there is a save point, hit it to actively make the save count and progress onwards. There's actually a reset to last save option in the menu I use pretty regularly across the recording here, in the case I really screw something up. So I fail at this, but this room right here is actually one of the first circumstances where if you know the game well enough, you can really trick things out. Because in order to get to this room normally, you need to go up and left and right until you reach the exit. But there's actively very precise jumps you can do using effectively Mario 64 movement methods to get up there sooner. Specifically, if you move in one direction with Sybil and then hold the opposite direction immediately with the analog stick and jump, you'll do a backflip like that, side hop effectively. With the right control and precision, you can use that to really break level design, especially after we get our next power-up, which I try to do, and do to some extent, but I largely also try to follow this game's route, sort of. This next room is where the real beast of this game can become obvious if you explore well enough. As we've seen, the Dream Breaker can break cracked walls. It doesn't look like it, but this wall right here stands out because it is cracked on the opposite side. You're not meant to know you can do this until later. It's actually very well hidden on a first playthrough because of how it blends in. But this leads to a completely pitch black room that if you know how to platform in correctly, you can actively get the final power-up in the game, like second or third. You do technically need the next one to get it more reliably. Pseudoregalia is a 3D Metroidvania. You can get multiple power-ups in multiple orders, just depending on how well you either know Sybil's movement utility, or how well you know the level design. More so the former than the latter. This, to me, is where the real joy in this game can be on a second playthrough, because you can really just do things in so many orders in this game. Also, I was crouching a moment ago. That's a thing you can do to begin with to avoid attacks, or do little emotes effectively. I was not meaning to do that. My controller was doing that on its own for reasons I'll talk about more in a moment. For right now, it's time for our second power-up and one you really can learn to game, the slide. Press the left trigger or the Q key on the ground to slide. Gain a boost of speed and slide under tight gaps and some attacks, but by itself an incomplete technique. The slide in general is a faster method of movement, so you're going to see me spamming that a lot throughout the game, but worth noting, you can also use it to not only slide under tight gaps, you can slide and then do a side flip to gain some extra air from the extra momentum. But there's a bug with this thing that ended up becoming a feature that the developer Ritzler actively focused on. Namely, if you do a side hop at the exact end of the jump, you can get one of 2 extra high jump states where Sybil will either flash blue or I think the other color is white or yellow. And the amount of height and momentum she gains from doing that is insane. You can use it to completely skip the platforming puzzles in some rooms, and frankly, I wish I was better with it than I am. Which honestly kind of describes a lot of this movement in this game. I wish I was better at it than I am, and I don't think I'm bad at it, it's just that the speed of finger movement you need to do to actively pull off some of the really intense stuff that speedrunners do overwhelms me, specifically. Mind you, it's like I've never really been a speedrunner. I've almost done it for Shovel Knight, as I mentioned several times across other LPs. I did consider actively going out of my way to grab that final power-up early in the game, but I ultimately decided not to because the one time I've actively done it, I was stuck in the pitch dark room trying to find my way through it, even with the slide jumps, for the better part of like 20-30 minutes. With that said, while this is a Metroidvania, the Dilapidated Dungeon here is a very linear starting area that obviously has more routes we can do stuff with, but I want to get other power-ups before I even remotely consider doing that. Hello there, little goat butler, what do you have to say? You're disguised as paper thin, but it'll fool most of them. Not like it matters. You're stuck here like the rest of us now. No getting past Strong Eyes. Well, we'll see about that, won't we, little guy? Now, we are coming up on our first proper jump cut in the LP, and I do this several times throughout for one of 2 reasons usually. I forget if I do it at the save point coming up here or in the room after that. But specifically, I either jump cut at save points to start a new recording session or to get to the successful take of a run of level design. Or in the case, I just fail at a jump enough times. In this case, though, it's technically neither of those. It's that I fail at something else enough times. It's time for our first little boss fight. Oh, hello there in the distance. Who are you? Meet Strong Eyes. This Dark Souls boss that escaped Dark Souls has a giant sword that he knows how to use very well. You can either do a downward slice with it, a jumping downward slice, a horizontal slice that is surprisingly hard for me to really analyze. And he can also do a AoE roar attack, where he causes an AoE around it that's kind of hard to get a good judge on the distance of. Obviously, there's a lockout in the game like in Ocarina of Time. I forget if this was actually in the game when I first played it. But the thing is with Strong Eyes, you need to take your time. You only have so much health, and he can drain through it pretty quickly, even if you can heal. You can game him a little bit, though, by sliding under his horizontal slices. But for some reason, despite having platinumed several Dark Souls games, I actively always forget to do that consistently. It's only really super obvious when this game has the rare boss fight, but combat is definitely not this game's specialty. With that said, I do still like the boss fights in general. I also especially love the music for them. Mind you, this game's soundtrack in general is incredible. I believe it had 3 different composers, Potato Tetto, Plus W, Plus, and Still Crisp, I believe. If memory serves, when I was doing research during the footage recording phase of this LP, I think Still Crisp also did music for Friday Night Funkin' in some regard. Plus W Plus I think only worked on this. Meanwhile, Potato Tetto did some sound work on Panzer Paladin, as well as Tobu Tobu Girl, I believe? Overall, the best times to capitalize on Strong Eyes is getting 1 or 2 swipes in after he does an attack, specifically either the downward swipe or the roar attack, and then just getting out of the way until he does either a jump attack or otherwise to try and capitalize on that afterwards. You really cannot get greedy in this fight. Oh, right, he also has that attack where you can dig stones out of the ground. Each of those will hurt you, and I have a really tough time dodging that attack more often than not. Thankfully, the few boss fights the game has are also over decently quickly. That is a small key. There was actually a locked door near the last save point, so we now use that to open it. You do so by attacking the door with the Dream Breaker. With that said, outside of this first one where you really only have the one choice, you can really weigh which locked door you want to open, because unlike most of Zelda's history, for instance, as a comparison, you can use a small key to open up any locked door as long as you can reach it. There's actively exactly enough small keys to open every door in the game. Due to that, there are several routes you can go across in this game, and you can pretty much find every small key in the game with any power-up combination as long as you're finding them along the way and exploring well. There are some tighter areas for platforming if you do that in the wrong order, but you can really get anything done whenever you want. Also, I hit a switch a moment ago. I'll talk about that in a moment because we have a tablet to read. A tower holding the essence of the princess, never to be seen again. But with the 3 powers of the sun, one can find their own path. So we need to find a tower area in the game, and we need to have 3 abilities named after the sun in order to get up there reliably. Before we leave the Dilapidated Dungeon, though, we want to fall down here and aim for this little hole in the wall to find our first power-up that's not a notable upgrade. This is a health piece. Gain 3 of these, and Sybil will gain an extra health orb on the top left. There is a bit of an oddity when it comes to the amount of those in the game, but I'll talk about that towards the end of the LP in general. Now, I would normally speed up or jump cut to my next area, but I want to showcase that you can use the jumps to get up here, for instance, to talk to this goat butler. What's dead should stay dead. It's dead. It should stay dead. What's dead should stay dead. What's dead is dead. What's dead is dead. Should stay dead. But he's back. Well, that's disconcerting. Now, I didn't mention it when we were in this room the first time, but this specific block right here was actively attached to a chain on the top of it. Whenever you see this type of block, you can actively attack its chain to cut it down and usually make a shortcut through platforming. What I did right there, by the way, was the super good version of the side flip after a slide. Not the most powerful version of it, but as you can see, it gave me enough extra height and speed to get up there pretty quickly and avoid most of that room. Again, if you use that correctly, especially after gaining one of the other notable power-ups in the game, you can just destroy this game's level design. I really recommend you watch a speedrun of this game at some point. If memory serves, the current world record's about 11.5 minutes long. So exactly where we are in the part, pretty much. It's a show to watch. So a few moments ago, we hit a switch on the way back out from the Strong Eyes room. I think on the way in as well, but that's from a failed tick against the boss fight. Largely, switches in this game serve one of 2 purposes. Either they're an on-off toggle to trigger elevators or platforms that'll take you to some other parts of the level design, or they open up shortcuts outright like that one did, which allowed you to get back into the first area of the Dilapidated Dungeon without having to do a big jump. Welcome to Castle Sansa. I love this area's song. Again, I love the soundtrack in general. So the Dilapidated Dungeon is largely a very linear area just to get you introduced to the game, barring the shortcut to a way later game area I showcased. But Castle Sansa is where you can really just take several different paths in the game. These crystals are pretty nice, right? They make me feel safe. I think I'm gonna lick it. I bet it's full of minerals. Sure thing, buddy. Now, worth noting, I don't really show this off throughout the game, but there's chairs in the level design that you can actively sit on with Sybil. Specifically, there's one on the left that you saw for a moment ago, had the prompt rest on it. You can actively sit on chairs that say rest to have Sybil recover some of her HP without using either a save point outright or the power bar that you build up by fighting enemies. In here, we got our next power-up, and this one's kind of interesting because it actually wasn't in the game at launch. This is the Memento. Press D-pad up or tab to see your mental map. To move the map, press lock on and move camera while active. Rooms will be revealed to you as you enter them, allowing you to more easily chart a course through an area. This is the game's map feature. This was not in the game at launch, making navigation doable, but definitely more of a mind game. So many of them have been trapped in the dungeon, and for what? The game was plenty playable without the map, but mind you, I am very used to this genre in general and have a very good internal sense of direction when it comes to gaming stuff and even real life. But I've seen several people online, as well as I have several friends that have poor senses of direction that just got lost to a point of not being able to finish the game without it. With that said, the map isn't a fix-all. Specifically, the map will showcase the room you're in and the rooms you've been in, but not where you are in that room, so you still need to do some amount of looking around to get a good shape of things in your head. This is the Indignation power-up. Higher power gives you increased combat capabilities. Upon reaching power level 2, the range of your attack is extended. At level 3, your damage is increased. It is reset upon spending it on a heal. What this means is the power we now gain by hitting enemies will give you buffs as you gain extra pips of it on the top left. Specifically, at 0 or at 1 power level, you actively just have a heal stocked up, but at power level 2, you have more range, and at power level 3, you just do more damage. There's supposed to be a new armor display in the library I wanted to see. Oh, with the state of the castle, I can't find the entrance anywhere. I miss that comfy hay. More often than not for me, Indignation's more important for the range increase on the Dreambreaker, because there's certain jumps that can be more easily made with that. In either case, Indignation definitely does reward skillful play in such a way where you can either just not heal for too long or rely more on the save points and benches to heal should you want to use those. Also, I just realized I never talked about a thing. About 10 minutes ago, I said I was crouching without meaning to. That was due to my controller. Specifically, at the start of this LP, I used 3 different controllers. GameSir controller I really like that's stylized after a DualShock, my DualSense from my PS5, and finally, using an 8-bit DOE adapter, my Switch Pro controller. I swapped because a decently common enough issue with this game is that controller players will just see their controls get remapped as they're playing. And it seems to either depend on OS versions or just a weird Steam input deal. For instance, it happened to be in this LP, but it didn't happen to me when I did my first playthrough this on stream on my laptop about a year and a half, 2 years ago now. It's weird. With that said, welcome to the library the Goat Butler mentioned. You read a book about a beautiful princess waiting in a tower to be saved by a charming prince. The ending is torn out. This is the smallest area of the game, but we spend a little more time here than you'd think because there's a lot of just little books you can read on the shelves here. You read a book about the forbidden secrets of cooking. Your mind is torn asunder from the culinary secrets driving you insane. A lot of this is either lore hints or flavor text, but I find it incredibly charming. You read a book full of classic plays. All the world's a stage. In a way, it kind of reminds me of a certain area in Final Fantasy V that had very similar stuff going on to it. But I think that's just because I really like reading books in libraries and games to begin with, because either you get jokes or you get full-out novels like you do in the Trails series, really. While I go about reading some of the extra bits of dialogue here, let's talk about my history with this game. I actively heard about this game on a podcast I was listening to at the time, Big Think Dimension. And the way that the person who was playing it on that podcast was talking about it, Chris Wolfhard, I just knew I needed to play it because everything that they said about it just sounded like it was up my alley. And it helps that at the time and to this day, this game is only $6 on Steam. So I was like, yeah, no, that's worth a shot. And I'm very glad I did, because I ended up finding one of my favorite platformers in recent memory. Mind you, that does have the asterisk of 3D platformers specifically, because I do play a lot of 2D platformers. 3D platformers I don't play nearly as often. Heck, there's a lot of big ones that have come out the last, decade or so I still have not touched, unless the name is, Sonic or Mario in general. You read a book about how to deal with loss. Your mind is made at whole, driving you sane. God, I wish that were me. So the library here is probably one of the biggest indicators for how open this game's level design is when it comes to the areas you can explore in what order, but also how adaptive the game is to what abilities you might have with its platform placements. Because the main reason we're here is to grab another power-up for Sybil that is arguably the most important part of her toolkit. But you can hold off finding this for half of the game, depending on how you explore things. Heck, on my first playthrough, I think this is the third or fourth ability I found after leaving the Dilapidated Dungeon. And I'm making it my first one here because I realize how important it is now. Well, first one that's an active piece of movement utility, of course, because I already have the Memento and Indignation. But then again, one of those wasn't even in the game at launch. Again, it's a little complicated. So in order to get the power up here, we need to platform up the bookshelves in this room to get up to the second story, as the door that's on the first story that leads to the power up is blockaded by a piece of wood that we cannot break. While we're on the way up, though, you might notice in this room, if you look behind me right now, there's actually a red gem on a platform in the distance. I'm going to deal with those later. Those are another aspect of the game that was added in an update, but I want more movement utility first. You read a book about a girl who falls in love with a monster. She loves the monster enough to leave behind her family. This room's always kind of stood out to me in one regard, though. Namely, the power up here is surrounded by an ice block we need to attack 3 or 4 times to make it break. I'm assuming that's there because at one point there was maybe a way for you to get here without the Dream Breaker. But as far as I can think of in this game, there'd be really no way to do that without executing some really precise clips into geometry, I imagine. But this is one of the best abilities in the game. This is the Sungreaves. Press the A button or the space bar while in the air. After a short delay, do an air kick. Hitting walls and objects with it will cause you to jump away. Can be done up to 3 times until it's reset. Try kicking early to maximize distance. This is big for Sybil. You can now do a kick in midair and actively bounce off walls like it's Metroid up to 3 times in a row to get extra height and in some cases distance. Like the sliding side hop, this is a very powerful ability. In the right circumstances and knowledge, you can actively use it to really game some level design. Especially because, as you just saw, you can bounce off some walls at some pretty weird angles depending on how you hold the control sticks. But it does take a lot of execution still. This is a game that's easy to play, hard to master, I guess is a good way to put it. But when you actively start getting the flow down for platforming and all that with Sybil's increasing moveset, you can do some nuts stuff. That tutorial is a pretty good instance of what you can do with the Sungreaves. You can use it to gain some height in some smaller areas, you can use it to gain some distance in narrow corridors and all that. There's only really 2 limitations the Sungreaves really have. For one thing, as we've already mentioned, you can only use it up to 3 times in a row before having to touch the ground to reset the Greaves, so to speak. But also, you can't really reliably use them to climb a single wall. There are ways you can gain some height on a small vertical wall with it, bouncing only off of it, and there are ways for you to bounce along a single wall horizontally, but I am really bad at doing it, frankly. I remember when I was trying to learn the speed run, that was one of my big limitations for certain item routes, and it's part of why I just stopped trying. Now that we have the Greaves, though, we're technically done here in Listless Library. This set of rooms is just looping us back to the main hall. There is going to be an item we're going to grab while we're there, though. And there's also a locked door in this area I don't have a key for yet, so we're going to come back here decently later in the LP to grab the remaining items here. The reason I actively really like the Goat Prince route that I found that I'm using as reference for this LP largely is... Largely, this route actively gets areas done in 1 or 2 visits, with the only exceptions being places like Castle Sansa that you use to travel to other areas to begin with. On top of that, this route is decently easy to play without intense experience and precision, as many other more efficient runs and routes frequently do speedrun level jumps and wall clips, which I do not care to fail at trying for 10 minutes in a row. While I'm here going through this room, which is ultimately for another health piece, I believe, one piece of movement you see me doing here and again until I get a later ability is bunny hopping, which is pretty directly out of things like Mario 64, as well as the Source Engine games like Half-Life 2. Specifically, and there are easier ways to do this later on, if you slide off an edge, you can hit the A button rhythmically as you're hitting the ground to preserve the momentum from the slide and move faster. It is a little trying to do without a certain later ability, but it is possible to use to carry your momentum forward and get through certain larger rooms easier, or at least faster in most cases. I do recommend saving in pretty much every instance you see a save crystal, by the way, barring certain speedrun adjacent situations, as you take enough damage in this game quickly enough, especially in early game, where a death is always possible. Falling into most pits is an instant death, though, I should note. You usually just take half a pip of health of damage, and that can build up if you're messing up the same jump enough, especially in certain rooms more so than others. I do really like Castle Sansa, by the way. The music here is nice and calming for one thing, but also, it probably is the most wide open area in terms of the routes you can take to get certain items or reach certain other areas in orders that maybe aren't the one that is the main route they sort of intend, quote unquote. Mind you, I'd say a main route for this game only really exists for the first like quarter of it or so, as we find the tower area that tablet mentioned that is our current destination. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2 we're going to use Castle Sansa here as a vector to reach several new power-ups and areas along the way. See you guys then.